He turned the proposal into punishment, not a choice. But between tears and cold promises, something unexpected bloomed. That night, the millionaire who had never loved surrendered to her gaze. And the deal that began with pride ended in passion. The afternoon was falling over New York City when Raphael Montgomery stepped out of the helicopter at the Montgomery Investments heliport. At 42, he was one of the most powerful men in the American financial market, owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire that stretched from real estate to the tech sector. The impeccable Italian suit and platinum watch were not just accessories, but symbols of the power he wielded over people and institutions. As he walked through the glass and marble corridors of the top floor of the skyscraper that bore his surname, employees bowed in respectful greetings that he barely acknowledged. Raphael had no time for pleasantries. His empire demanded constant attention, and any sign of weakness could cost millions. "Mr. Montgomery, your lawyer, Mr. Paul, is waiting in your office with the documents you requested," informed Rebecca, his trusted secretary for over a decade. "Is there a problem with the Health Corp acquisition?" he asked without breaking his stride. "No, sir. It's about the other matter. Your godfather's will." Raphael stopped abruptly, his dark eyes hardening like obsidian. It had been 3 months since his godfather, Augustus Albright, had passed away after a brief illness, leaving behind a will that revealed secrets Raphael preferred to keep buried forever. "Send him in when I call," he ordered, entering his office and closing the door. The presidential office occupied half the floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city he had helped transform. Raphael poured himself a rare whiskey before pressing the intercom. "You can send Paul in." The middle-aged lawyer entered carrying a black briefcase. His expression was grave, indicating that the news would not be pleasant. "Good afternoon, Raphael. I managed to track down the Albright family as you requested. The situation is complex." "Get to the point, Paul. What did you discover about my godfather's illegitimate daughter?" "Julia Albright, 34, a widow. She lives in Seabrook on the Connecticut coast with her younger sister, Marianne, who suffers from a rare autoimmune disease and requires continuous treatment. They run a historic inn that is about to be auctioned off due to debts accumulated after the death of Julia's husband." Raphael looked at the photographs Paul placed on the table. A woman with wavy brown hair, sun-kissed skin from the coast, and intense green eyes that seemed to challenge the camera itself. It wasn't the kind of beauty produced in expensive cosmetic clinics, but something more authentic, almost wild. Beside her, a paler, more fragile young woman with the same green eyes, the sick sister. "According to your godfather's will, Julia is entitled to 15% of the shares in Montgomery Investments, as Augustus was one of the company's silent founders. These shares are worth approximately—" "I know exactly what they're worth," Raphael cut in sharply. "What else?" "The historic inn in Seabrook also legally belonged to Augustus, although he never claimed ownership. He left it for the daughters to manage as a form of compensation for his abandonment." Raphael stood up and walked to the window. The sun reflected off the mirrored buildings, creating a golden skyline over the megalopolis. The mention of his godfather's abandonment made his stomach turn. Augustus had been more present in his life than his own father. To see him connected to a secret family was like discovering a posthumous betrayal. "I want that woman out of my company and out of my life," he finally said, turning to face the lawyer. "How much?" "I beg your pardon. How much do we need to buy her share and make her disappear?" Paul adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "It's not that simple, Raphael. The will's clauses are specific. The shares cannot be sold for 5 years. Augustus wanted to ensure his daughter had permanent financial security, not just a one-time payout." Raphael smiled coldly. Paul knew that smile. It was the same one that preceded ruthless business decisions, the kind of smile that made executives lose sleep. "There's always a way, Paul. Find a loophole. In the meantime, I want everything on these women. Debts, problems, weaknesses. Something we can use. Raphael, may I suggest a more—" "No, you may not," he interrupted, returning to his desk. "I want full reports in 48 hours, and schedule a visit to Seabrook. It's time to meet the supposed heiress to the empire I built." Meanwhile, miles away in the historic coastal town of Seabrook, Julia Albright was closing the wooden shutters of the Harbour House Inn a centuries-old inn tucked between the sea and the coastal forests. The last guests had left that morning, and there were no new reservations for the coming days. The low season was being especially cruel that year. "Mari, did you take your medicine?" she asked, entering her younger sister's room. Marianne was sitting by the window overlooking the sea, a book abandoned in her lap. At 28, she possessed an ethereal, almost fragile beauty, accentuated by the pallor of the disease that slowly consumed her strength. "I did," Dr. Henry called. He said he managed to get my case included in an experimental study at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City, but we would need to cover accommodation for at least 3 months. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, hiding her worry with an encouraging smile. "That's great. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can rent a small apartment there. Ju, I saw the bills on your desk. I know we're about to lose the inn. We can't afford treatment in New York." Julia held her sister's hands. Since the death of her husband Charles 3 years earlier, she had been fighting to keep the inn running and ensure Marianne's treatment. The debts Charles had left, combined with the high medical costs, had created a financial hole impossible to fill. "Don't worry about that. I have some savings put away and—" The phone interrupted their conversation. Julia answered, and her face lost its color as she listened. "What do you mean tomorrow?" she questioned, her voice trembling. "The auction was scheduled for 2 months from now. You can't just move it up like this without—" "I see. Yes, I'll be there." Hanging up the phone, Julia seemed to have aged years in seconds. "What was it?" Marianne asked, alarmed. "The bank moved up the auction for the inn. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. How can they do that? It's our home, our life. Someone made an offer to buy the entire debt. And they're in a hurry to close the deal." Marianne hugged her sister, both feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders. "What are we going to do now?" Julia looked out the window at the sea that had always been her refuge. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the despair she had kept bottled up for so many months. Then she straightened her shoulders, as she always did when life challenged her. "I'm going to New York 3 months ago. I received a strange letter from a notary's office about some Augustus Albright, supposedly our father. I never paid it any mind because Mom never spoke of him, but the letter mentioned a will. Maybe it's our last chance." "You barely knew this man, Ju. He was never present in our lives." "That's exactly why he owes us something," Julia replied with renewed determination. "If he really was our father and left something for us, I'm going after it. Not for me, but for you, for your health, for our home." The next morning, Julia caught the first bus to New York City, carrying only a backpack with basic clothes and the documents that proved her relationship with Augustus Albright. Among them, an old photo where her mother appeared young and smiling next to an elegant man she had never known. As the landscape of the rolling coastal hills passed by the bus window, Julia had no idea that in New York, in the penthouse of one of the tallest skyscrapers on Park Avenue, Raphael Montgomery was already studying her complete file, plotting strategies to eliminate this unexpected threat to his empire. What neither of them knew was that fate had set in motion gears that would change their lives forever. A game where power and money would confront the force of feelings that no contract could predict or control. New York City greeted Julia with a fine, persistent drizzle. Leaving the Port Authority bus terminal, she navigated the crowded subway to Park Avenue, the financial heart of the largest metropolis in North America. The skyscrapers that rose like monuments to economic power made her feel even smaller, an ant before giants of concrete and glass. Following the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper, Julia finally found herself before the imposing Montgomery Investments building. It stood out among the others for its bold architecture and a height that seemed to challenge the cloudy New York skies. An involuntary tremor ran through her body, not from the cold, but from apprehension. In the luxurious lobby, her simple appearance, jeans, a white t-shirt, and worn sneakers, clashed with the environment where executives in expensive suits and women in high heels bustled about. Julia smoothed her rain-dampened hair before approaching the impeccably made-up receptionist. "Good morning. I'd like to speak with the person in charge of Augustus Albright's estate." The receptionist looked her up and down with an expression that mixed boredom and disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's an urgent matter. Julia hesitated for a moment. "I'm his daughter." A flicker of surprise crossed the receptionist's face. She picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice before addressing Julia again. "Please wait a moment." Minutes later, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and a leather briefcase approached her. "Miss Albright? I'm Paul Mendez, legal counsel for Montgomery Investments. Please follow me." In the panoramic elevator that ascended swiftly through the floors, Paul watched her with poorly disguised curiosity. "I must say, your visit is unexpected. We were just trying to locate you formally." "I'm here because of the letter I received about Mr. Augustus's will," Julia replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the numbers flashing on the elevator panel. "And because I need to understand why someone is so interested in buying my family's inn that they would move up an auction without prior notice." Paul adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "I believe all your questions will be answered shortly." The elevator stopped at the top floor. Julia was led down an elegant corridor to an anteroom where a secretary with a severe expression awaited them. "Has Mr. Montgomery been informed of her arrival?" Paul asked. "Yes. He asked that she be taken directly to the conference room and said he will join you in a few minutes." The conference room was an intimidating space, with a dark wood oval table surrounded by leather chairs. An entire wall was made of windows offering a spectacular view of the city. Julia remained standing, watching New York under the rain, feeling like an intruder in a world that did not belong to her. "Would you care for some coffee?" "Water?" Paul offered. "No, thank you. I just want answers." The door opened and Julia turned to face the man who entered. Raphael Montgomery had a presence that immediately dominated the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with striking features, his dark eyes conveyed an almost predatory intensity. He wore a charcoal suit that surely cost more than all the furniture in Julia's inn combined. "So you're Augustus's daughter," he said, his deep voice carrying a tone impossible to decipher. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "And you must be the man trying to take my inn," Julia retorted, holding his gaze without hesitation. A cold smile curved Raphael's lips, straight to the point. "I appreciate that. Please have a seat." He gestured to a chair and took his place at the head of the table. "Has Mr. Mendez explained your situation?" "No, and I don't have time for games. In less than 24 hours, the inn that has belonged to my family for generations will be auctioned. My sick sister is alone in Seabrook, worried, and all I know is that I received a letter mentioning that Augustus Albright, a man I never knew, supposedly my father, left me something in his will. And coincidentally, someone rushed to buy our debts just now." Raphael exchanged a look with Paul before opening a folder in front of him. "Augustus Albright was my godfather, and one of the silent founders of Montgomery Investments. He was in fact your biological father, as confirmed by the documents he left. In his will, you and your sister were named heirs to 15% of this company's shares, in addition to the legal ownership of the Harbour House Inn in Seabrook." Julia felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Her hands trembled slightly and she hid them under the table. "That doesn't make any sense. My mother never spoke of him. Why did he never contact us while he was alive? Augustus had commitments, an official family, a reputation to uphold," Raphael answered, a touch of bitterness in his voice. "But apparently in his final days, guilt caught up with him." "Guilt?" Julia felt a rising anger. "He abandoned my mother, let her raise 2 daughters alone, never cared about us, and now he thinks he can buy forgiveness with company shares." Raphael leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. Most people who entered that room were eager to please him, intimidated by his power. But this woman faced him with an unexpected dignity. "The Montgomery shares are worth approximately $50 million, he informed her, closely watching her reaction. "You've just become a very wealthy woman, Miss Albright." Julia blinked, stunned by the magnitude of the sum, but quickly regained her composure. "And the inn? Why are you so interested in it that you'd move up the auction?" Raphael smiled again, this time with a calculating glint in his eyes. "Business, just business. The Seabrook area is about to receive a major tourism investment, and your inn occupies a strategic location. I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Montgomery. What's really going on here?" Raphael stood up and walked to the window, observing the city he considered his territory. "The truth, Miss Albright, is that your sudden appearance as a shareholder represents an inconvenience to my plans. We are in the process of merging with an international conglomerate, and new shareholders, especially with family ties to Augustus, could complicate the process. So you want me to renounce the shares, Julia concluded. In exchange, we offer to pay off all the inn's debts, definitively transfer the property to your name, and provide an additional sum that will guarantee your sister's complete medical treatment for as long as necessary. Julia also stood up, approaching Raphael by the window. The rain was now falling harder on New York, creating rivers in the congested avenues. And if I refuse? Raphael's eyes hardened. The auction will happen tomorrow. The inn will be sold. As for the shares, well, there are ways to contest wills, especially when paternity is acknowledged posthumously and without a DNA test. Is that a threat? It's a business reality. I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone. You get your inn back, secure your sister's treatment, and I maintain control of the company I built. Julia took a step back, her green eyes flashing with indignation. I didn't come here to be intimidated. If Augustus Albright was my father and left me part of this company, I have rights. As for the inn, it belonged to my family long before you even dreamed of existing. I'm not giving up anything. Raphael moved closer, deliberately invading her personal space, using his height as a form of intimidation. You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? I can destroy your life with a single phone call. To his surprise, Julia didn't back down. On the contrary, she lifted her chin in defiance. Threats don't work on me, Mr. Montgomery. I've lost too much to be afraid of a man in an expensive suit. A tense silence hung in the room. Paul looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, while Raphael and Julia faced each other like two fighters before a match. Finally, Raphael took a step back, his eyes never leaving hers. A different smile appeared on his lips, not of disdain but of genuine interest. Interesting, he murmured, almost to himself. Then louder, I have an alternative proposal, one that could resolve our impasse definitively. I'm listening, Julia replied cautiously. I need an heir, Raphael declared, direct and without preamble. And you need to save your inn and secure your sister's treatment. Julia frowned, not immediately understanding. What exactly are you proposing? A contract. You will give me a child who will be my legitimate heir. In return, the inn will be yours, free of debt, and your sister will receive the best medical treatment available. After the child's birth, you will have guaranteed financial stability for the rest of your life. The shock made Julia stumble back until she hit the edge of the table. Her legs threatened to give way. Are you proposing? What? That I be a surrogate? I prefer to think of it as a strategic alliance. You carry the Albright name, you have Augustus's blood. My child also being your child closes the circle perfectly. An heir who unites the two families. This is absurd. Repugnant. Julia felt her face burn with indignation. Do you think you can buy me as if I were a commodity? Raphael remained impassive in the face of her reaction. I am offering a business transaction. Nothing more, nothing less. Think carefully before you refuse. He checked his wristwatch. You have until tomorrow 9 a.m., 1 hour before the auction, to give me your answer. He walked to the door, stopping only to add, Mr. Paul will arrange your accommodation for tonight and is authorized to clarify any details of the contract. I suggest you set emotion aside and think like a businesswoman. After all, you are Augustus Albright's daughter, and he always knew how to recognize a good opportunity. With that, Raphael left, leaving Julia stunned, torn between fury at the indecent proposal and desperation over her sisters and the inn's situation. The rain continued to fall relentlessly on New York City, while within her, an even more violent storm was brewing. Julia spent the night in a luxurious hotel suite in Midtown Manhattan, courtesy of Raphael Montgomery, though the irony of this gift was not lost on her. She couldn't sleep. Raphael's words echoed in her mind, mingling with images of Marianne alone in Seabrook, the inn about to be auctioned, and the letter revealing a paternity her mother had taken to her grave as a secret. At 6 in the morning, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, Julia went for a walk through the streets that were just beginning to wake. The cold New York morning air cut her face, but she barely felt it. Her hands tightly clutched her phone, where she had just received a message from Marianne. The medication ran out. I have a fever. Dr. Henry said we need to get to New York urgently. Julia leaned against a wall, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. For the first time since her husband had passed, she allowed herself to cry in public, silent tears that mixed with the city's persistent drizzle. 8:45, Julia entered the lobby of Montgomery Investments. This time there was no hesitation as she approached the receptionist. Inform Mr. Montgomery that Julia Albright is here, with his answer. Minutes later, she was once again in the panoramic elevator, ascending to the building's penthouse. Her reflection in the mirror showed deep dark circles and a pale face, but also an unwavering determination in her green eyes. When the doors opened, Raphael Montgomery was already waiting for her in the corridor. "Come to my office," he said, without any greeting. Raphael's private office was even more intimidating than the conference room. Decorated in shades of grey and black, with abstract art on the walls, it conveyed exactly the message its owner intended: power, sophistication, and a certain calculated coldness. "Well?" Raphael inquired, settling into his leather chair behind an impressive black marble desk. Julia remained standing. "Before I give you my answer, I want some guarantees." An almost imperceptible smile curved Raphael's lips. "Proceed." "First, I want the deed to the inn transferred to my name today, before the auction. Second, I want my sister enrolled in the best treatment program available in New York, with all expenses paid, including accommodation and follow-up care. Third, she hesitated, after the baby is born, I want my financial independence guaranteed, without having to ask permission to live my life." Raphael studied her for a moment, impressed by her objectivity despite the situation. "That seems reasonable. Mr. Paul has already prepared a contract detailing all these points and a few additional ones." He opened a drawer and took out a bound document, pushing it across the desk toward her. "How much time do I have to read this?" Julia asked. "The auction is at 10. It's 9 o'clock now. 1 hour to decide the rest of my life?" Raphael shrugged. "Business often requires quick decisions, but if you prefer, I can arrange for some coffee while you read." Julia took the contract and sat in the armchair opposite the desk. The pages detailed the agreement with clinical precision. She would commit to carrying a child with Raphael's genetic material, undergo constant medical supervision during the pregnancy, and hand over the child after birth, retaining only basic legal maternal rights. In return, she would receive the inn free of debt, lifelong medical treatment for her sister, and a generous pension after the birth. The coldness of the document made her stomach churn. Terms like fertility period, insemination, delivery of the child, transformed something that should be the fruit of love into a commercial transaction. However, upon reaching the last page, she saw that Raphael had included the exact guarantees she had requested, and even details she hadn't thought of, such as a guaranteed university education for the child and a share in the inn's profits if it prospered under her management. At 9:45, Julia returned the contract to Raphael, who had been watching her intently. "Any objections?" he asked. "One additional condition," Julia replied. "If I'm going to do this, I want it to be in the least clinical way possible." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you proposing? No doctors, syringes, and labs. If I'm going to have a child, even if it's for a contract, I want it to be conceived as a child should be." She felt her face burn, but kept her voice steady. "I'm not asking for romance, just dignity." For a moment, Raphael seemed genuinely surprised. Then a look of reluctant respect appeared on his face. "Acceptable," he agreed, adding a handwritten note to the contract before signing it. "Your turn." Julia held the pen, feeling its weight as if it were made of lead. Images of her life in Seabrook, of Marianne's pale face, of the inn that was her only home, flashed through her mind. Then, with a deep breath, she signed her name on the indicated line. "It's done," Raphael declared, picking up the phone. "Rebecca, inform the legal department that the auction of the Harbor House Inn in Seabrook is to be cancelled immediately. The property has been acquired by Montgomery Investments and will be transferred to Julia Albright's name today." Hanging up, he turned to Julia. "As for your sister, I've already arranged for her transfer to Mount Sinai Hospital. A team is on its way to Seabrook to pick her up with all necessary comfort. Dr. Lawrence Esposito, an expert in autoimmune diseases, has already been briefed on the case and is awaiting her. Julia felt a wave of relief so intense she had to lean on the desk to keep from falling. For a moment she completely forgot the price she had just agreed to pay. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Don't thank me. It's a contract, not a favor," Raphael replied coldly. "As for our personal agreement, I suggest you move into my house in Greenwich today. I've already instructed my staff to prepare your accommodations. You will have your own room, of course, until the appropriate time to fulfill your part of the deal." The reality of what she had just done hit Julia with full force. She nodded mechanically, unable to find words. "A car will be waiting for you at 5 p.m. in the hotel lobby to take you," Raphael continued, already turning his attention back to his laptop, as if the matter were closed. "I suggest you use the day to buy whatever you need. My assistant will arrange for a corporate credit card for your expenses." "I don't need a credit card," Julia replied, regaining some of her dignity. "I just need to see my sister when she arrives in New York." Raphael looked up from his computer, studying her with curiosity. "As you wish. I'll inform you when she arrives at the hospital. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video conference with investors in 5 minutes." Julia left the office feeling strangely empty. In the elevator, she faced her reflection again, wondering if she would still recognize the woman in the mirror in a few months. Meanwhile, in his office, Raphael watched the city from the window, the contract still open on his desk. The image of Julia Albright, with her dignity and courage in the face of adversity, remained vivid in his mind. For the first time in many years, he felt something other than the usual disdain for those who crossed his path. It was an unsettling, almost uncomfortable feeling, something he was not prepared to name, let alone explore. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, as arranged, a black Jaguar was waiting for Julia in the hotel lobby. The driver, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, opened the door for her. "Good afternoon, Miss Albright. I'm Anthony, Mr. Montgomery's private driver." "Good afternoon, Anthony," Julia replied, settling into the back seat with her single backpack. "Before we go to the house, could you take me to Mount Sinai Hospital? My sister should be arriving." "Mr. Montgomery has already instructed me, miss. Your sister arrived an hour ago and is being evaluated by the medical team. We'll go directly there." During the drive through New York's congested avenues, Julia watched the city with distant eyes. In less than 48 hours, her life had completely changed. From the owner of a nearly bankrupt inn in Seabrook, she had become part of a bizarre agreement with one of the most powerful men in the country. The irony was not lost on her. At the hospital, a nurse led her to the room where Marianne was already settled. Seeing her sister lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and looking even more fragile than usual, Julia felt tears well up in her eyes. "Mary," she whispered, approaching to kiss her sister's forehead. "Ju," Marianne smiled weakly. "What's going on?" Suddenly there were doctors at the house, an air ambulance. "They said you authorized all of this." Julia held her sister's hand, a lump forming in her throat. "I managed to solve our problems, Murray. The inn is safe, and you're going to get the best possible treatment." "How?" Marianne asked, her green eyes, so much like her sister's, filled with confusion. "Was it that, Will? Was that Augustus Albright really our father?" Julia hesitated, unable to tell the whole truth. "Yes, he was, and he left us more than we imagined. Don't worry about anything now. Just focus on getting better." At that moment, a middle-aged doctor with a kind expression entered the room. "Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Lawrence Esposito. You must be Julia, Marianne's sister." He extended a hand, which Julia shook. "I've already begun the evaluation, and I'm optimistic. The experimental protocol I mentioned is perfect for her case, and I've already started the process to include her immediately." "How long will she need to be hospitalized?" Julia asked. "At least 2 weeks for this initial phase. After that, we can assess her response to the treatment and adjust the plan." "And what about the cost, doctor?" "I have an agreement that covers the expenses, but I need to understand the figures." Dr. Esposito smiled gently. "Don't worry about that. Mr. Montgomery has already guaranteed full coverage with no limitations. It's rare to see that kind of commitment, even among our wealthiest patients." Julia nodded, a mix of gratitude and bitterness welling up in her chest. Was the price of her sister's health going to be too high? After spending some more time with Marianne, who soon fell asleep from the medication, Julia left the room and found Anthony waiting patiently in the hallway. "Ready to proceed to the residence, miss?" She nodded, lacking confidence in her own voice. In the car as they left the Upper East Side for Greenwich, her cell phone rang. It was Raphael. "Is your sister settled in?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, thank you. Dr. Esposito seems very competent. He's the best in the field. I'm in a meeting that will likely run late tonight. Janet, the housekeeper, will show you to your room and explain the house rules. We'll talk tomorrow." Before Julia could reply, Raphael had hung up. The car continued along the FDR Drive, leaving the chaos of New York City behind and entering the more exclusive areas of the region's luxury communities. Finally, they passed through the gates of an ultra-secure community, where only high-end mansions stood on large, impeccably landscaped grounds. Raphael Montgomery's residence, situated at the highest point, was a modern construction of straight lines, with a glass and stone facade, surrounded by a minimalist garden where contemporary sculptures predominated over flowers. Anthony parked in front of the main entrance, where a woman of about 50, in a discreet uniform and with an impeccable posture, was waiting. "Good evening, Miss Albright. I'm Janet, the housekeeper. Welcome." Her tone was polite but reserved, as if she didn't quite know how to treat the newcomer. "Thank you, Janet," Julia replied, feeling completely out of place as she followed the housekeeper through the mansion's luxurious rooms. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Vast spaces with double-height ceilings, minimalist decor in shades of grey, white and black, carefully lit contemporary art and furniture that Julia suspected was signed by famous designers. There were no photographs, personal objects, or any sign that this place was a home, rather than an architectural showcase. "This will be your room," Janet announced, opening the door to a spacious suite on the second floor. The room, like the rest of the house, was elegant and impersonal. A king-size bed with white linens, a reading armchair by the window overlooking the gardens, an empty walk-in closet, and a marble bathroom with a separate tub and shower. "Mr. Montgomery asked that I arrange for some basic clothing for your arrival," Janet continued, gesturing to the closet. "If you need anything specific, I can provide it." "That won't be necessary. I brought what I need," Julia replied, placing her modest backpack on the pristine bed. Janet nodded, a slight frown revealing her opinion on the suitability of Julia's wardrobe for this environment. "Breakfast is served from 7. Mr. Montgomery usually leaves at 8. Lunch is at noon and dinner at 8 in the evening. There is a gym in the basement, a heated pool outdoors, and a library on the ground floor at your disposal. If you need to go out, Anthony will be available to drive you. Any questions?" "No, thank you." When the housekeeper left, Julia sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of her new reality. She was suddenly living in the house of a stranger, a cold and calculating man with whom she had agreed to have a child by contract. The distance between this life of empty luxury and her cozy inn in Seabrook seemed not just geographical, but almost existential. She opened her backpack and took out the only photograph she always carried, she and Marianne as teenagers, with their mother in front of the inn, all smiling under the summer sun. She placed it on the nightstand, a small piece of her real world in this artificial environment. That first night in Raphael Montgomery's mansion, Julia couldn't sleep. She stood for hours at the window, watching the lights of New York City in the distance, thinking of her sister in the hospital, the empty inn in Seabrook, and the contract she had signed. The emotional storm inside her was stronger than the thunderstorm that began to fall outside, heralding a long night and a life that had taken a turn she could never have predicted. In the weeks that followed, Julia and Raphael coexisted like strangers under the same roof. He left early for the office and returned late, often when Julia was already in her room. The rare meals they shared were marked by awkward silences, broken only by superficial conversations about the weather or the day's news. Meanwhile, Marianne was responding well to the new treatment. Julia's daily visits to the hospital were the only time she truly felt like herself, away from the oppressive mansion and the agreement that became more real with each passing day. "You seem different." "Ju," Marianne commented one afternoon as Julia arranged fresh flowers in the hospital room. "Thinner, tense. What's really going on?" Julia forced a smile. It's just adjusting to New York. The big city is intense. And this Raphael Montgomery? You never really explain your relationship with him. How did he come into our lives and why is he helping so much? It's complicated, Mari. He was our father Augustus's godson. Let's just say it's his way of honoring his godfather's legacy. Marianne frowned, clearly unconvinced. You're living in his house. Do you think I don't know? The nurses talk when the driver comes to pick you up. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, holding her sister's hand. Listen, I promise I'll explain everything when you're fully recovered. For now, just trust me, okay? I'm doing what's best for both of us. You always sacrifice for me ever since we were kids, Marianne murmured, her eyes welling up. Sometimes I wonder what your life would be like if you didn't have to carry the weight of my illness. Don't even think about it, Julia interrupted, kissing her sister's forehead. You're my family, my priority, always. Returning to the mansion that evening, Julia found Raphael in the living room, a rare sight at that hour. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the illuminated city through the panoramic windows. How's your sister? He asked, surprising Julia. It was the first time he had shown genuine interest in Marianne's health. Getting better every day. Dr. Esposito is optimistic, she replied hesitantly. Thank you for asking. Raphael nodded, still looking out the window. Anthony told me you've been refusing the shopping trips Janet offered. You also haven't used the credit card I provided. I don't need new clothes or jewelry. What I have is enough, Julia answered, bothered by the direction of the conversation. Raphael turned to face her, his dark eyes unreadable. You're not what I expected. Julia Albright. And what exactly did you expect? Someone more interested in the financial advantages of our arrangement. Most people I know would do anything for a fraction of what I'm offering. Julia felt her face burn with indignation. I'm not most people, and I'm not doing this for money or luxury. No, you're doing it for love, Raphael replied, a trace of bitterness in his voice. Love for your sister, for your noble really, almost romantic. Is there a problem with that? Julia challenged. Raphael took a sip of his whiskey before answering. No problem at all. I just find it interesting. Love is a concept that has no place in business. And what we have is a business. A business that involves creating a life, Julia retorted. But perhaps that's just another transaction for you. A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Raphael stood up, placing his glass on a side table. According to Dr. Esposito, you are in the right fertile period. I suggest we begin to fulfill our part of the contract, starting tomorrow. The calculated coldness with which he spoke those words made Julia shiver. The whole situation suddenly seemed absurd, humiliating. Is that how it's going to be? A formal announcement, as if you were scheduling a business meeting? Raphael raised an eyebrow. Would you prefer roses and a candlelight dinner? That would be equally false, don't you think? I'd prefer honesty and a minimum of consideration, Julia replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Something in his gaze changed, becoming less harsh. Fair enough. Let's have dinner together tomorrow. Right here, no formalities. We can talk, get to know each other better, if you prefer. It was Julia's turn to raise an eyebrow. That wasn't in the contract. A faint smile curved the corner of Raphael's lips. Consider it an unwritten addendum. Good night, Julia. The next evening, against all her expectations, Julia found herself getting ready with more care than usual. She chose the only dress she had brought from Seabrook, a simple navy blue cotton model that highlighted her green eyes. She left her brown hair down, falling in natural waves over her shoulders, and applied only a light touch of makeup. Janet had prepared dinner on the mansion's terrace, overlooking the illuminated gardens. The table was elegantly set for two, with crystal glasses and fine china, but without the excessive formality Julia had feared. Raphael was already waiting when she arrived, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a more relaxed version of the ruthless executive she had known. He stood up when he saw her, his eyes briefly scanning her figure with a glint of appreciation he didn't try to hide. You look beautiful, he said, pulling out a chair for her to sit. Thank you, Julia replied, uncomfortable with the unexpected compliment. This is a lovely spot. I asked Janet to leave us alone. She prepared dinner and has retired for the evening. I hope you like Italian food. The meal proceeded in an initially awkward silence, gradually broken by cautious questions from both sides. Raphael asked about Seabrook, the inn, life on the coast. Julia answered briefly at first, but slowly opened up as she spoke of the place she loved so much. The harbour house was built in the 18th century, did you know? She said, a genuine sparkle animating her eyes for the first time since she had arrived in New York. It was a trading post in colonial times, then became the residence of a British family, and was finally turned into an inn by my grandmother in the 70s. The walls are so thick that no matter how hot it is outside, it's always cool inside. I've never been to Seabrook, Raphael commented, pouring more wine for them both. I always hear about its beauty, but I've never had the time. Time is something that's always lacking when you live only for work, Julia observed, risking a direct look at him. Have you always been like this? All business? Raphael paused, his glass halfway to his mouth as if the question had caught him by surprise. Not always, he finally answered. There was a time when I believed in other things. What things? The same illusions most people have, he said with a shrug. Love, trust, loyalty. Until you discover they're just pretty words we use to mask self-interest. There was a poorly disguised bitterness in his voice that piqued Julia's curiosity. Someone hurt you badly, didn't they? Raphael let out a dry, humorless laugh. Straight to the point, aren't you? I'd rather not discuss my past. Fair enough. After all, we're just business partners, Julia retorted, a touch of defiance in her voice. He looked at her, his dark eyes inscrutable. Business partners who are about to create a life together. I think that deserves, at the very least, a little mutual understanding. The tone of the conversation had shifted, becoming charged with a different kind of tension. Julia felt an unexpected warmth rise up her neck to her face. The wine must be taking effect. So tell me something about yourself that isn't in the contract, she challenged, holding his gaze. Raphael smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and lighting up his eyes. I like to sail. I have a sailboat I almost never use. When I was a teenager, I dreamed of sailing around the world, seeing remote places far from everything and everyone. Why did you never fulfill that dream? Life happened. Responsibilities, the company. He made a vague gesture with his hand. What about you? Any unfulfilled dreams? Julia hesitated before answering. I always wanted to be an art restorer. I even studied for 2 years in college, but when my mother got sick and Marianne's condition worsened, I had to go back to Seabrook and take over the inn. She smiled melancholically. I still have some books, and sometimes I try my hand at restoring old pieces from the inn. Wasted talent, Raphael commented, seeming genuinely interested. Why don't you resume your studies now that your sister's situation is stable? Maybe after. Julia made an unconscious gesture toward her still flat stomach. After our agreement is concluded. The mention of the real reason that brought them together brought back the reality they had managed to forget for a few moments. The relaxed atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by a palpable tension. Raphael cleared his throat, standing up. We can have a digestive in the living room, if you'd like. Julia nodded, following him inside the house. In the living room, he poured brandy into 2 small crystal glasses, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Julia couldn't help but notice the slight shiver that ran through her body. Have you thought about after? She asked, mustering her courage. When the baby is born? Raphael stared at the amber liquid in his glass, as if searching for answers there. To be honest, no. I've always been a man who plans every detail, but this... He shook his head. I've only been thinking about getting an heir. We'll see about the rest when the time comes. An heir, Julia repeated, the word sounding cold and impersonal. Is that how you see a child? A successor to your empire? Thus, isn't that what all parents want? For their children to continue their legacy. A legacy isn't just fortune and power, Raphael. It's love, values, memories. He looked at her, an enigmatic expression on his face. You're an idealist. Julia, the real world rarely fits into romantic visions. And you're a cynic, she countered. Someone hurt you so deeply that now you only see transactions where there should be feelings. Raphael's expression hardened. You don't know me well enough to make such judgments. No, I don't, Julia agreed, just as you don't know me. But we're about to create a life together, and maybe we should at least try to understand each other. A dense silence fell between them. Raphael finished his brandy in a single gulp and placed the glass on the table with a precise movement. It's getting late, he said, his voice neutral again. If you prefer, we can leave the rest of the agreement for another time. Julia felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Part of her wanted to postpone the inevitable, to buy time to process everything that was happening. But another part, one she was reluctant to admit, felt strangely drawn to this complex, wounded man behind the cold facade. Perhaps that's for the best, she agreed, placing her untouched glass next to his. Good night, Raphael. She was already at the living room door when his voice stopped her. Julia. She turned, finding him much closer than she had expected. Raphael had moved silently towards her, and now stood just inches away, his woody cologne enveloping her like a physical presence. I was married once, he said, the words coming out as if each one cost him an enormous effort. She was pregnant. I lost them both in an accident 7 years ago. The unexpected revelation caught Julia completely off guard. Before she could form any response, Raphael moved away, heading for the stairs. Good night, he said, without looking back. Julia remained motionless in the empty room, his words echoing in her mind like pieces of a puzzle starting to take shape. The cold, calculating man who had proposed a contract to produce an heir suddenly gained new dimensions, layers of pain and loss she had never suspected. That night, lying in her bed, Julia couldn't get Raphael out of her thoughts. The image of the ruthless businessman began to merge with glimpses of the man she had seen during dinner, someone with abandoned dreams, deep wounds, and a loneliness he effectively masked behind contracts and business deals. For the first time since signing the agreement, Julia allowed herself to consider that perhaps there was more to this story than a simple business transaction, and that possibility, instead of reassuring her, only made everything infinitely more complicated. The next morning, Julia was awakened by soft knocks on her door. Opening it, she found Janet with a worried expression. Mr. Montgomery asked me to inform you that he had to travel to Washington, D.C. urgently, government matters related to the company. He couldn't say when he would return, but he left instructions for the driver to remain at your disposal for visits to your sister at the hospital. I understand. Thank you, Janet, Julia replied, trying to hide the mix of relief and disappointment she felt. Breakfast is served, miss, and this arrived for you, the housekeeper added, handing her a plain white envelope. Alone again, Julia opened the envelope and found a card with Raphael's firm, angular handwriting. Urgent matters have called me to D.C. I apologize for the sudden departure. I took the liberty of contacting Columbia University. The Art Restoration Department is accepting applications for the next semester. The necessary paperwork is on my desk in the study. If you decide to resume your studies, Anthony can take you to see the campus, Raphael. Julia reread the note several times, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions flooding her chest. On one hand, she was relieved by the postponement of the inevitable. On the other, Raphael's unexpected gesture, remembering the dream she had casually mentioned during dinner, touched her in a way she didn't want to admit. This man was an enigma. One moment cold and calculating, proposing a contract to produce an heir as if negotiating a company acquisition. The next, revealing vulnerabilities and showing a consideration that didn't fit the image she had built of him. In the days that followed, Raphael's absence made the mansion feel even quieter and more oppressive. Julia divided her time between visits to Marianne at the hospital, whose health was visibly improving, and long walks through the property's gardens, trying to organize her increasingly confused thoughts and feelings. On one of these afternoons, while exploring a wing of the mansion she hadn't seen before, Julia found what appeared to be Raphael's personal study, different from the more formal office where they had discussed the contract. This room was smaller, cozier, with bookshelves covering an entire wall and an old dark wood desk in front of the window. Feeling like an intruder but unable to contain her curiosity, Julia entered the room. Unlike the rest of the impersonal and cold house, this space contained signs of its owner's personality. Classic literature books with bookmarks, a chessboard with a seemingly unfinished game, Nautical charts rolled up in a corner, confirming the interest in sailing he had mentioned. And then, almost hidden behind a picture frame turned face down, Julia found a photograph. In it, a younger Raphael, smiling in a way she had never seen, was embracing a woman with dark hair and delicate features. The woman had a small baby bump, and they both seemed to radiate happiness. On the back, a date from 7 years ago and a single word: always. Julia placed the photograph back exactly as she had found it, feeling like an invader of memories that did not belong to her. The image of the smiling Raphael beside his pregnant wife contrasted sharply with the cold, distant man she knew. That photograph was the missing piece of the puzzle, explaining the obsessive desire for an heir and the emotional wall he had built around himself. She left the study silently, carrying the weight of her discovery. What had once seemed like a calculated agreement now took on the contours of a personal tragedy. Raphael wasn't just seeking a successor for his business, he was trying somehow to reclaim what he had lost. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She stood on her room's balcony, watching the moon over the mansion's gardens, lost in thought. With each passing day, the contract she had signed seemed more complex, not just on paper but in the emotions it was beginning to stir. A week passed with no news from Raphael. Julia took the opportunity to visit the Columbia University campus, following the suggestion in his note. The art restoration department was everything she had dreamed of, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond her obligations to her sister and the inn. Marianne continued to respond well to treatment, and Dr. Esposito was already talking about discharging her for outpatient follow-up. Life seemed to be reorganizing itself, except for the absence of the mansion's owner and the uncertainty of the agreement they had made. On the morning of the 10th day after Raphael's departure, Julia received an unexpected phone call while visiting Marianne at the hospital. "Hello?" she answered, not recognizing the number. "Miss Albright." The voice on the other end was serious, professional. "This is Paul Mendez, Mr. Montgomery's lawyer." "Yes, I remember you. Has something happened?" "Mr. Montgomery suffered an incident during his stay in Washington. Nothing serious, just stress and exhaustion, according to the doctors. He is returning to New York today and asked me to inform you." "I see. Thank you for letting me know," Julia replied, surprised by the genuine concern she felt. "There's one more thing," the lawyer continued. "Mr. Montgomery has asked me to prepare the documents for the final transfer of the Harbor House Inn to your name, regardless of the rest of the agreement. The papers will be ready for your signature tomorrow." Julia felt a tightness in her chest. Why would Raphael transfer the inn to her without demanding fulfillment of the contract? "Does this mean our agreement is cancelled?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I am not authorized to discuss the terms of the personal contract between you. I suggest you speak directly with Mr. Montgomery when he returns." After hanging up, Julia looked at Marianne, who was watching her curiously. "Who was that?" "Raphael's lawyer. He's coming back from his trip today." "And that makes you so upset because—" Marianne asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not upset," Julia defended unconvincingly. "Ju, I know you better than anyone. I know when something is wrong, and ever since we came to New York, you've been different." Marianne took her sister's hand. "What is going on between you and this man?" Julia sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. She could no longer hide the truth from Marianne. "I made a deal with him, Marie, a contract." "What kind of contract?" "The kind that—" Julia hesitated, searching for the right words. "The kind that ensures the inn stays with us, that your treatment continues, and in exchange, I give him an heir." Marianne's eyes widened in shock. "Are you telling me you agreed to have a child with a man you barely know as some sort of business transaction?" Julia nodded, feeling the weight of shame. "We had no choice. Marie, the inn was going to be auctioned, your treatment was at risk." And he offered a solution. Tears began to roll down Marianne's face. "Because of me. You agreed to this for me?" Her voice trembled with emotion. "How many more times are you going to sacrifice your life for mine, Julia?" "It's not a sacrifice," Julia protested, though part of her knew that's exactly what it was. It was a practical decision. Practical? Having a child isn't like buying a car or signing a lease. Marianne wiped her tears angrily. "And the worst part is I know you. I know you wouldn't do this without starting to get emotionally involved. The comment hit Julia like a direct shot. It was true. Despite all her attempts to remain distant and treat the situation as purely contractual, she was beginning to develop feelings for Raphael. Confused, contradictory feelings, but undeniably real. "It's complicated," she said finally. "He's not what he seems. There's more to him than that cold business facade." "Ju, are you listening to yourself?" Marianne shook her head in disbelief. "You're defending a man who proposed a contract for you to bear his child." "He lost his pregnant wife in an accident, Mari. I think that explains a lot about who he is today." Marianne held her sister's hands, her gaze intense. "Promise me one thing. Promise me you won't go through with this, unless it's what you really want. Not for me, not for the inn, not for a contract, but for you." Before Julia could answer, her cell phone rang again. It was Janet. "Miss Julia, Mr. Montgomery has just arrived and asked if you will be home for dinner." "Yes, I will," she replied, then hung up. She turned to her sister with a forced smile. "I have to go. We'll talk more tomorrow, okay? Ju," Marianne called as she was at the door. "Remember your promise." Back at the mansion, Julia felt a growing anxiety. What would she say to Raphael? How would she react upon seeing him, now that she knew about the tragedy in his past? And more importantly, what did she really want from this relationship? Upon entering, she found the house in a flurry of activity. Staff moved quickly, preparing what seemed to be an elaborate dinner. Janet coordinated everything with military efficiency. "Ah, miss, good to have you back. Mr. Montgomery requested dinner be served at 8. I've laid out your favorite dress and set aside some jewelry he selected." "My favorite dress?" Julia repeated, confused. "Yes, the navy blue one you wore at your last dinner with him. Mr. Montgomery commented that it looked especially beautiful on you." Julia felt her face flush. The thought that Raphael had noticed and remembered such a detail stirred an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. At 8 o'clock sharp, Julia descended the stairs wearing the mentioned dress, but without the suggested jewelry. Instead, she opted for the only adornment she always wore, a simple silver necklace with a shell-shaped pendant, a gift from her mother. Raphael was waiting for her in the living room. He looked thinner, and there was a shadow of fatigue on his face, but his impeccable posture and penetrating eyes were the same. He wore a dark suit, more casual than his usual ones, without a tie, the white shirt open at the top button. "Good evening, Julia," he greeted, his voice betraying an unusual touch of nervousness. "I hope you don't mind the dinner. I felt we needed to talk." "I heard you were unwell," she replied, watching him closely. "Are you feeling better?" "Nothing serious. Overwork, according to the doctors." He smiled slightly. Apparently not even billionaires are immune to stress. There was something different about him, a vulnerability that wasn't there before, as if the wall he kept up had cracked a little during his absence. "Mr. Paul called me," Julia said, deciding to get straight to the point. "He mentioned something about the final transfer of the inn." Raphael nodded, gesturing for them to sit. "Yes, I thought it was the right thing to do, regardless of any other agreements between us." "Why?" Julia asked, watching him intently. He took a deep breath before answering. "Because during those days in D.C., I had time to think. About the contract, about my motivations, about you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I realized I was repeating patterns from the past, trying to control everything and everyone around me, as if that could prevent the unexpected from happening again." Julia felt her heart race. Raphael had never been so direct about his feelings. "And did you come to any conclusion?" "Yes, that I can't force you to honor an agreement that was made under duress. The inn is yours by right, as Augustus's daughter. And as for the rest," he looked her directly in the eyes, "if it happens, it should be because we both want it, not because a piece of paper demands it." The sincerity in his words caught her off guard. This was not the cold, calculating Raphael who had proposed the contract weeks ago. "What changed?" she asked, genuinely curious. Raphael stood up, walking to the window before answering. "When I was in Washington, I got a call that your sister had a crisis. Nothing serious, just a reaction to the medication, quickly controlled. But in that moment, before I knew everything was okay, I felt—" He paused, as if the admission was difficult. "I felt fear. Not for the contract or what I might lose, but for you. For what you would feel if something happened to her. Julia stood up as well, moving closer to him. Why would you care about what I would feel? Raphael turned to face her, a vulnerable expression on his face she had never seen before. Because over these weeks you stopped being just a name on a contract. You became someone who matters. Julia's heart leaped. It was the closest confession of feelings he had ever made. Raphael, Before she could continue, Janet entered the room announcing that dinner was served. The moment of intimacy was broken, and they both proceeded in silence to the dining room. The meal was served at the elegant main table, with elaborate dishes that had surely been prepared by a chef hired especially for the occasion. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, with Raphael telling her about the challenges of his negotiations in D.C. and Julia updating him on Marianne's progress. It was only during dessert that Raphael returned to the interrupted topic. Julia, I want you to know that I tore up my copy of the contract. She stared at him, shocked. You what? I tore it up. It no longer exists. The Harbour House Inn is yours, no strings attached. Marianne's treatment will continue for as long as necessary, also with no conditions. But why? Julia couldn't understand such a change. Raphael hesitated before answering, his eyes fixed on the wineglass he swirled between his fingers. Because I discovered that some things can't be bought or imposed by contracts. They have to happen naturally or they have no value. The confession hung between them, laden with implicit meanings. Julia felt a lump in her throat, moved not just by the words but by the transformation she was witnessing in the man before her. And what about your desire for an heir? She asked in a low voice. It's still there, Raphael admitted. But not at any cost. Not at the expense of someone else's happiness. After dinner, they walked together through the mansion's illuminated gardens. The night was clear, with a full moon casting silver light over the meticulously planned landscape. It was the first time they had truly talked without the shadow of the contract between them. My wife's name was Helen, Raphael said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled. She was a photographer, specializing in nature. We met when she was doing a feature on American entrepreneurs for an international magazine. We were married 6 months later. Julia listened intently, knowing how much this revelation cost him. She was 7 months pregnant when she decided to take one last professional trip before the birth. A shoot in a national park in Utah. His voice grew quieter, heavy with pain. The jeep she was in with her guide had an accident on a steep road during a storm. No one survived. I'm so sorry, Raphael, Julia murmured, resisting the urge to touch his arm in comfort. I was supposed to be with her, he continued. We had planned to go together, but a last-minute meeting with foreign investors stopped me. I put work first, as always. His voice trembled slightly. Since then, I've buried myself in business. I turned Montgomery Investments into an empire, as if that could fill the void she left. Julia felt tears in her eyes. His pain was palpable, raw even after so many years. And did it work? She asked softly. Raphael gave a bitter laugh. What do you think? 7 years later, I'm a man who tried to buy a woman to have his child, as if I could replace what I lost with a contract. Without thinking, Julia took his hand. It was the first time they had touched beyond formal greetings, and an electric current seemed to pass between them. We all make mistakes when we're hurting, she said. The important thing is to realize it and try to fix it. Raphael looked at their joined hands, then at her face. The moonlight highlighted her green eyes and softened her features, giving her an ethereal beauty that made him hold his breath. You make me want to be a better person. Julia Albright, he said, the words coming out like a confession. Her heart raced. They were dangerously close now, the tension between them palpable in the night air. Raphael's eyes dropped to her lips, and for a moment Julia was sure he would kiss her. Instead, he pulled back slightly, releasing her hand. It's getting late. We should go inside. The walk back to the mansion was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. At the staircase leading to the bedrooms, they paused, an air of expectation between them. Good night, Julia, Raphael said, his voice huskier than usual. Good night, she replied, fighting the disappointment she felt. She turned to go up, but his voice stopped her. Julia. She turned back, finding him closer than she expected. Yes? "Then would you like to have dinner with me again tomorrow?" he asked, an almost boyish vulnerability in his tone. Julia smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, I would." In the days that followed, a new routine was established. Dinners together every night, conversations that stretched into the early hours, mutual revelations that built a bridge over the chasm that had initially separated them. There was no more mention of the contract, just two adults getting to know each other, discovering surprising affinities and differences that, instead of pushing them apart, created an unexpected balance. Julia told him about her childhood in Seabrook, her mother raising two daughters alone, the financial struggles, the interrupted dream of studying art, her marriage to Charles, a genuine but brief love, cut short by a heart attack that had taken him 3 years prior. Raphael, in turn, spoke of the pressure of growing up as the only son of a ruthless tycoon, his godfather Augustus being a more present paternal figure than his own father, the determination to prove his worth through business, and the transformation Helen had brought to his life before the tragedy. Marianne was discharged from the hospital, but chose to stay in an apartment arranged by Raphael near the hospital to facilitate her medical follow-ups. She still cast worried glances at her sister whenever Raphael's name came up, but she was beginning to notice the change in Julia. A sparkle in her eyes, a lightness in her gestures, signs of a happiness she hadn't seen in a long time. On one particularly pleasant evening, after a relaxed dinner, Raphael invited Julia to see his sailboat, moored at a marina in the Hamptons. It would just be for the weekend. "We could leave on Friday and come back Sunday," he proposed, with poorly disguised anticipation in his voice. "I'd love that," Julia replied, feeling a flutter in her stomach as she realized the implications of the invitation. A weekend together, away from the mansion and New York City, was a significant step. On Friday, they left early for the coast. The car ride was peaceful, with Raphael surprisingly relaxed at the wheel of his Range Rover, humming along to classic singer-songwriters playing on the radio, a side of him Julia had never imagined existed. The Hamptons greeted them with a radiant sun and a sea breeze that immediately made Julia feel at home, reminding her of Seabrook. The marina where Raphael's sailboat was docked was exclusive, frequented by the country's yachting elite. The Helen, a name that made Julia swallow hard when she read it on the hull, was an impressive 45-foot sailboat with elegant lines and luxurious finishes. Raphael led her aboard with evident pride, showing her every detail of the vessel he rarely used. "It's beautiful," Julia commented, feeling the polished wood beneath her bare feet. "Helen chose it," Raphael said with a melancholic smile. "She said one day we would sail the world with our child." The comment hung between them, laden with meaning. Raphael seemed to be testing the waters, watching her reaction. "And do you still want that?" Julia asked bravely. "To sail the world with a child?" His eyes met hers, intense and sincere. "Yes, but now I imagine a different crew." Julia's heart raced at the insinuation. They looked at each other for a long moment, the tension between them almost palpable. "Shall we go for a sail?" Raphael suggested, breaking the spell. "The day is perfect." They spent the afternoon sailing through Long Island Sound, with Raphael patiently teaching her the basics of sailing. Julia proved to be a quick learner, and soon they were working in sync, as if they had sailed together for years. As the sun began to set, Raphael anchored in a small secluded cove, where the crystal-clear water reflected the orange and pink hues of the sky. They had dinner on the deck under the first stars, a simple meal he had prepared himself, another hidden talent that surprised Julia. "You're full of surprises." "Raphael Montgomery," she remarked, after tasting the grilled fish with herbs he had served. "I could say the same about you," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've never met anyone like you, Julia." "What do you mean?" "Someone so authentic. No artifice, no hidden agendas. You're exactly who you appear to be." "And is that a good thing?" she asked with a shy smile. "It's extraordinary," Raphael answered, his voice dropping an octave. "In my world, sincerity is a precious rarity." The mood between them shifted, charged with an intensity that had been building for weeks. When Raphael gently touched her face, Julia felt a tremor run through her entire body. He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. For the first time since signing that contract, she was absolutely certain of what she desired. Their lips met under the starry sky, and the kiss, initially gentle, almost reverent, soon deepened, releasing weeks of pent-up tension. Raphael's hands slid down her back, pulling her closer, while her fingers tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the expression on Raphael's face was one of pure admiration. "Julia, I didn't plan this when I brought you here," he said, still holding her in his arms. "I want you to know there's no more contract, no obligations. Whatever happens between us must be because we both want it for no other reason." She smiled, touching his face tenderly. "What I want, Raphael Montgomery, is you. Not the billionaire, not the man of contracts, but you, the man who sails at sunset, who remembers my favorite dress, who cares for my sister even without any obligation." That night, under the stars, and rocked by the gentle sway of the sailboat, Julia and Raphael gave themselves to each other, not as parties to a business agreement, but as a man and a woman who, against all odds, had found something rare and precious, a chance to start over, to heal old wounds, to build something new from the rubble of lives marked by loss. The return to New York City brought Julia and Raphael back to reality, but something fundamental had changed between them. The weekend on the sailboat had marked the beginning of a genuine relationship, built on foundations very different from the contract that had initially united them. At the Greenwich mansion, Julia did not return to her separate room. At Raphael's invitation, she moved into the master suite, making official what their hearts had already decided. Marianne was the first to notice the change when Julia visited her at the apartment near the hospital. "You're different," she commented, watching her sister closely. "There's a glow about you I haven't seen in years." Julia smiled, unable to hide the happiness she felt. "Things have changed, Mari. Between me and Raphael, I mean. It's not a contract anymore, it's real." Marianne studied her sister's face with a mixture of joy and concern. "You've fallen in love with him." It wasn't a question, but Julia nodded anyway. "It happened naturally. He's not who we thought, Mari. Behind that cold facade there's a man who suffered enormous losses and built walls around his heart. But slowly those walls are coming down." "And is he in love with you too?" Marianne asked, still cautious. Julia hesitated for only a moment. "I think so. He hasn't said it in those words, but he shows it in so many other ways." She smiled, remembering the small gestures of affection. The intimate conversations late into the night, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing. "I'm happy for you." "Ju," Marianne said finally, squeezing her sister's hand, "I'm just afraid you'll get hurt. You come from such different worlds." "Maybe that's precisely why we complete each other," Julia replied, with a conviction that surprised even herself. The following weeks were like a dream for Julia. During the day, while Raphael worked, she devoted herself to planning the reopening of the inn in Seabrook, now free of debt, and to resuming her art restoration studies at Columbia, where she had secured a spot for the next semester. At night, she shared her projects and dreams with Raphael, receiving from him not only support, but valuable ideas and suggestions based on his business experience. The Harbour House Inn would undergo a complete renovation, maintaining its historic charm but with modernized facilities to attract a more sophisticated clientele. Julia insisted, however, on preserving the welcoming, family-like essence that had always been the place's hallmark. "I don't want to turn it into just another impersonal luxury hotel," she explained to Raphael as they reviewed the renovation plans. "What always set our inn apart was the human warmth, the feeling of being at home even when you're far away. That's exactly what will make it unique," he agreed, admiring her passion for the project. "Anyone can offer luxury these days. Authenticity is the real differentiator." Their relationship flourished, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine admiration. Raphael found in Julia a refreshing simplicity and honesty after years of navigating the treacherous waters of the corporate world. She, in turn, discovered in him layers of sensitivity and depth that the Raphael of the contracts had never revealed. On one particularly special evening, 2 months after the weekend on the sailboat, Raphael surprised her with a candlelight dinner on the mansion's rooftop, overlooking all of New York City. Under a starry sky and surrounded by dozens of orchids, Julia's favorite flowers, He finally spoke the words she had secretly been waiting to hear. "I love you." "Julia Albright," he said, holding her hands across the table. "I never imagined I could feel this again. You brought color back into my life when I only saw in black and white." Tears of happiness shone in Julia's green eyes. "I love you too, Raphael. More than I ever thought possible." That night, under the New York stars, they sealed their love with a kiss that promised a future together, not by contract or obligation, but by choice. Happiness, however, rarely comes without challenges. The first arose in the form of Vincent Ames, vice president of Montgomery Investments and a longtime friend of Raphael's. During a business dinner at the mansion, which Julia attended as hostess, Vincent made no effort to hide his displeasure with the relationship. "Raphael, we need to discuss the impact of these changes in your personal life on the business," he commented when they were finally alone in the study after dinner, with the doors ajar. "The investors are concerned. First Augustus's will revealing an unknown heiress. Now you're romantically involved with her. It looks suspicious, you have to admit." "My personal life is not a topic for discussion at board meetings, Vincent," Raphael replied coldly. "If it were just your personal life, I'd agree. But we're talking about Augustus's illegitimate daughter, heiress to 15% of the shares, who mysteriously ended up in your bed. The shareholders are questioning your decisions, Raphael. There are rumors you're emotionally compromised." Unbeknownst to them, Julia had moved close enough to overhear the conversation. Vincent's words hit her like a slap, bringing back all the insecurities she had begun to overcome. "And am I not?" Raphael's voice sounded defiant. "Yes, I am emotionally compromised, and it makes me a better man and a more balanced leader. Julia is not a risk to the company, Vincent. She's the best thing that's happened to me in years." Raphael's passionate defense warmed Julia's heart, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. She moved away silently before they could notice her presence, disturbed by the conversation she had heard. Later that night, when Raphael joined her in bed, Julia remained pensive. "Something wrong?" he asked, noticing her silence. "Raphael, do you think I'm harming your professional image?" she asked directly. He frowned, surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "I heard part of your conversation with Vincent. About the investors being concerned about our relationship, about it looking suspicious," Raphael sighed, pulling her into his arms. "Vincent is a corporate dinosaur who still believes CEOs should be emotionless machines. Don't listen to him. The only concerned investors are those who would prefer to see me manipulable and lonely, focused only on profits." But there's some truth to what he said. "I am Augustus's illegitimate daughter, an heiress to part of the company. People might think I'm with you for personal gain. And since when do we care what people think?" Raphael smiled, kissing her forehead. "I know who you are, Julia. I know you rejected my money even when you needed it most. I know you still want to work and study instead of simply enjoying my fortune. The people who matter know the truth about you." His words momentarily eased her worries, but the episode had left its mark. For the first time, Julia clearly perceived the social chasm that separated them and the obstacles they would still have to face. Days later, while Raphael was on a business trip to New York, Julia received an unexpected visitor at the mansion. Janet announced the presence of a lady who refused to identify herself or make an appointment, insisting she needed to see the woman living with my son. Surprised and apprehensive, Julia asked the housekeeper to lead the visitor to the conservatory, where she would receive her. Minutes later, she found herself face to face with Eliza Montgomery, Raphael's mother, an elegant woman in her 60s, with impeccably styled gray hair and eyes of the same penetrating intensity as her son's. "So you are Julia Albright," Eliza said, studying her from head to toe with a critical eye. "Augustus's daughter, who appeared out of nowhere and won my son's heart in record time." "Mrs. Montgomery," Julia greeted, maintaining her composure despite the evident hostility. "Raphael didn't mention his mother was coming to visit. Because he doesn't know. Raphael and I have a complicated relationship." Eliza gracefully sat in an armchair, still observing Julia. "I came to meet the woman who achieved what no one else has in the last 7 years, penetrating the fortress my son built around his heart." Julia sat in the opposite armchair, trying to decipher her visitor's intentions. "It wasn't a planned conquest, ma'am. It happened naturally. Eliza let out a dry laugh. Nothing happens naturally in the world of the Montgomerys, my dear. There are always interests, hidden agendas, power plays. Her eyes narrowed. What are yours? I have no hidden agendas, Julia replied, holding the older woman's gaze. I love your son. It's as simple as that. Simple? Eliza laughed again, more bitterly. A young woman of modest origins, suddenly heiress to a significant part of a billion-dollar empire, who ends up in the bed of that same empire's CEO. Forgive me if I don't see the simplicity in that. Julia felt her face burn with indignation. You don't know me. You know nothing about me or my relationship with Raphael. I know more than you think, Eliza retorted, her tone softening slightly. I had you thoroughly investigated. I know about your inn in Seabrook, your sick sister, your short marriage to Charles, your interrupted dream of studying art restoration. She paused. And I also know that, curiously, you rejected all of Raphael's attempts to buy you with expensive gifts. Unlimited credit cards and jewelry. Julia frowned, confused by the turn of the conversation. If you already know all this, then you must understand that I'm not with Raphael for money or status. Eliza studied her for a long moment before replying. What I know is that my son has suffered enough for several lifetimes. When Helen and the baby died, something inside him broke. He turned his pain into unbridled ambition, into obsessive control. He became just like his father, who manipulated lives and destinies like pieces on a chessboard. Her eyes softened. Until you appeared. You seem to approve of what you see, Julia commented cautiously. I'm reserving my judgment, my dear, but I admit there is something refreshing about your honesty. Eliza stood up, smoothing her expensive dress. I came prepared to face a sophisticated fortune hunter, and I find a young woman who seems to genuinely like my son for who he is, not for what he has. I love him, Julia repeated simply. We shall see if that is enough, Eliza replied, heading for the door. The world Raphael lives in can be merciless to people not born into it, Julia. Prepare for battles you can't even imagine exist. Before leaving, Eliza turned one last time. One last thing. Has Raphael mentioned plans for the future? Marriage, perhaps? The question caught Julia off guard. Not specifically. We're living in the present, getting to know each other better. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Raphael has always been a man of meticulous plans. The fact that he hasn't mapped out a precise roadmap for the two of you, she left the sentence hanging. Let him know I was here. Tell him his mother would like to have dinner with you both next week. With that, she departed, leaving Julia unsettled and confused. Eliza's final comment had hit a sensitive spot she herself had been avoiding. Despite the intensity of their relationship, Raphael had never mentioned concrete plans for the future. They lived one day at a time, with no verbal commitments beyond the love they shared. When Raphael returned from New York 3 days later, Julia recounted his mother's surprise visit. To her surprise, he didn't seem bothered. It was only a matter of time before she showed up, he commented, unpacking his suitcase. My mother has always had a knack for sniffing out changes in my life. What did you think of her? Intimidating, Julia answered honestly, but I think I passed the test in a way. She wants to have dinner with us next week. Raphael smiled, pulling her into his arms. That means she actually likes you. Eliza Montgomery wouldn't waste her time on someone she disapproves of. She mentioned your father, Julia commented carefully. She said you were becoming like him. Raphael's expression darkened. My father was a brilliant manipulator, capable of anything for power and control. Maybe she was right. The contract I initially proposed to you, he shook his head. That was exactly the kind of thing Henry Montgomery would do. But you changed your mind, Julia reminded him, touching his face tenderly. You tore up the contract, remember? Thanks to you, he said, kissing her softly. You reminded me there's more to life than contracts and acquisitions. That night, they made love with renewed intensity, as if both unconsciously felt the need to reaffirm the connection between them. They fell asleep in each other's arms, Julia feeling safe and loved despite the doubts Eliza's visit had planted. The following week, however, those doubts would take on a new dimension. Julia woke one morning feeling strangely nauseous. At first, she attributed the discomfort to the stress of the past few days and anxiety over the impending dinner with Raphael's mother. But when the symptom persisted for the next 3 days, now accompanied by an unusual tenderness in her breasts. A suspicion began to form in her mind. On impulse, she bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy far from Greenwich where she wouldn't be recognized. Back at the mansion with trembling hands, she took the test in the master suite's bathroom while Raphael was at work. 2 minutes later, she was staring at the positive result, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions taking over. Joy, fear, uncertainty. It all swirled in her chest as she looked at the 2 lines confirming what her body already knew. She was pregnant with Raphael Montgomery's child. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. The child who was initially meant to be the result of a cold contract was now on its way, conceived in genuine love and desire. But what would this mean for her relationship with Raphael? Would he be happy with the news, or would he suspect she had planned the pregnancy as a way to secure her place in his life? Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, the test still in her hand, Julia found herself facing a dilemma. Should she tell Raphael immediately, or wait for the right moment, perhaps after the dinner with Eliza? And how would he react to the news that she would, after all, be involuntarily fulfilling the main clause of the contract he himself had torn up? Lost in thought, she didn't hear the suite door open. Raphael, who had decided to come home early that day as a surprise, walked into the bathroom and found her sitting there, the pregnancy test clearly visible in her hand. "Julia," he called, his voice barely disguising his shock. She looked up, meeting his gaze. For a terrible moment, she saw only surprise in his expression, unable to decipher if it was good or bad. Then slowly Raphael's eyes dropped to the test in her hand and back to her face. "Are you—" Julia nodded, unable to speak. A whirlwind of emotions crossed Raphael's face. Shock, confusion, and then gradually something that looked like a cautious, restrained joy. "I didn't plan this," she rushed to say. "I swear it wasn't intentional. I know we haven't talked about children, that maybe it's too soon." Raphael approached slowly, kneeling before her. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Julia, you're giving me the most wonderful news I could ever imagine." "Really?" she asked, tears of relief welling in her eyes. "You don't think that you got pregnant on purpose?" He smiled, taking her hands. "I know you, Julia Albright. I know you wouldn't do that." "Ironically, I'm fulfilling the contract you tore up," she commented with a shaky smile. Raphael shook his head. "No, this is completely different. That contract was about an heir, a transaction. This—" he gently touched her still flat stomach. "This is about a family." "Our family?" Julia felt the tears roll freely now. "So you're happy?" "Happy doesn't even begin to describe what I'm feeling," Raphael replied, with an emotion she had rarely seen in him. "I'm ecstatic, terrified, amazed, and more in love with you than I ever thought possible." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that Julia felt her heart overflow. When they separated, Raphael kept his hands on her face, looking at her with intensity. "Marry me, Julia." The proposal, so sudden and sincere, caught her completely off guard. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Not because of the baby, but because I can't imagine my life without you. Because I want to build a future together, raise our family, grow old by your side. Because I love you more than I ever believed I could love someone again." Julia felt an indescribable happiness spread through her being. "Yes," she answered, with all the simplicity and sincerity that had always characterized her. "Yes, Raphael, I will marry you." In that moment, embraced on the bathroom floor of a Greenwich mansion, with a pregnancy test still in Julia's hand, they were further than ever from the cold contract that had initially united them. What had begun as a business transaction had transformed into a love story that not even the most romantic dreamer could have imagined. The dinner with Eliza Montgomery, scheduled for 2 days later, took on a completely new meaning. Now it wouldn't just be the formal introduction of Julia as Raphael's girlfriend, but as his fiancée and the future mother of his child. The news of the pregnancy, however, would remain a secret for now, a precious treasure they wanted to keep to themselves for a little longer. On the night of the dinner, as she got ready in the closet she now shared with Raphael, Julia couldn't help but notice how radically her life had changed in just a few months. From the nearly bankrupt inn in Seabrook to the mansion in Greenwich, from desperation over her sister's health to the joy of building a family with the man she loved, the journey seemed almost surreal. What are you thinking about? Raphael asked, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. Julia smiled, meeting his gaze in the reflection. About how life comes full circle. 6 months ago, I was about to lose everything. Today you have everything, he completed, turning to embrace her. And so do I. The tender moment was interrupted by Raphael's phone. He answered, frowning as he heard the voice on the other end. Vincent? We're about to leave for dinner. Can this be quick? His expression darkened as he listened, and Julia felt a knot in her stomach. Something was wrong. I see. No, I don't want to discuss this over the phone. Tomorrow? Morning at the office, he hung up, still looking worried. What happened? Julia asked. Raphael hesitated before answering. It seems someone leaked a copy of our original contract to the press. The story is about to be published on a major news portal. Julia felt the blood drain from her face. The contract? But you said you destroyed it. My copy, yes, but there were others. One with Paul, my lawyer, another in the company safe. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Julia recognized as a sign of deep concern. Vincent says the article talks about how the powerful CEO of Montgomery Investments tried to buy an heiress to bear his child, then turned her into his mistress. The words hit Julia like a physical blow. All the happiness of the past few days suddenly seemed at risk. Who would do this? And why? Someone who would benefit from my downfall, Raphael answered grimly. Vincent has always wanted my job. Or it could be one of the shareholders unhappy with the changes I've recently implemented. What are we going to do? Julia asked, her voice betraying her fear. Raphael moved closer, holding her shoulders firmly. First, we're going to have dinner with my mother and tell her about our engagement as planned. Tomorrow I'll confront Vincent and find out exactly what's happening. He smiled, trying to reassure her. Don't worry, I've faced worse crises. But as they left the mansion for the restaurant where they would meet Eliza, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was approaching, and that the fairy tale she was living might have a very different ending than she had imagined. The dinner with Eliza Montgomery took place in an atmosphere of poorly disguised tension. Although Raphael and Julia tried to maintain appearances, the specter of the imminent public exposure of their contract hung over them like a storm cloud. Eliza, with her characteristic astuteness, immediately sensed that something was amiss. You both seem worried, she remarked, after the waiter served the main course at the elegant rooftop restaurant of one of New York's most exclusive hotels. Has something happened that I should know about? Raphael and Julia exchanged a quick glance before he answered. We have 2 pieces of news, actually. One excellent and one complicated. He took Julia's hand across the table. The good news is that I asked Julia to marry me and she accepted. Eliza's aristocratic face lit up with a genuine smile. Finally, a sensible decision, son. She raised her glass in a toast. Welcome officially to the family, Julia. I confess I was expecting this announcement. Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery, Julia replied with a shy smile. Eliza, please. We're family now. She took a sip of wine before continuing. And the complicated news. Raphael took a deep breath. Someone has leaked an initial contract I proposed to Julia when we first met to the press, a contract that was voided months ago, but which, out of context, could cause a considerable scandal. To their surprise, Eliza did not seem particularly shocked or concerned. What kind of contract exactly? She asked, raising an eyebrow. An agreement for Julia to bear a child for me in exchange for financial benefits, Raphael answered, keeping his voice low despite the private setting. It was an impulsive and terrible proposal, which thankfully was never acted upon. We fell in love naturally, and the contract was voided long before our relationship deepened. Eliza studied her son with an expression that mixed disappointment and understanding. You really did become your father for a while, didn't you? Henry loved reducing people and feelings to contracts and clauses. She turned to Julia. And you accepted this arrangement initially? My sister was very ill. Our inn was on the verge of bankruptcy, Julia explained, not averting her gaze. I did what I felt was necessary to protect my family, but I never intended to go through with the contract without real feelings being involved. Eliza nodded slowly. 2 desperate people, each in their own way, who found love where they least expected it. A touching story. She smiled with irony, if told well, of course. What do you mean? Raphael asked, intrigued. The narrative, my son. It's all about how the story is told. Eliza placed her silverware delicately on her plate. You're reacting like victims awaiting the blow. Need I remind you that you are a Montgomery? Our family has built and destroyed empires with far less than the truth on our side. A spark of understanding lit up Raphael's eyes. You're suggesting we get ahead of it? That we tell our version before the story is published? Precisely. Eliza smiled, satisfied. The difference between a scandal and a heartwarming love story is merely perspective. And who better to tell your story than you yourselves? Eliza's suggestion was bold, but it made sense. Instead of waiting for the attack, they could seize control of the narrative. Raphael immediately picked up his phone and called his press agent, scheduling an exclusive interview for the next day with one of the country's most respected journalists, someone known for their integrity and sensitivity. The rest of the dinner proceeded in a lighter mood, with Eliza sharing stories of Raphael's childhood and Julia talking about her plans for the inn in Seabrook. When they said their goodbyes, Eliza surprised Julia with a genuine hug. "You're good for him," she whispered in her ear. "Better than I ever imagined he would find." Back at the mansion, Raphael and Julia spent hours preparing for the next day's interview. They decided to be completely honest, acknowledging the initial mistake of the contract, but contextualizing it with the full truth. Raphael's prolonged grief for his wife and unborn child, Julia's desperate fight for her sick sister, and how fate had transformed a cold agreement into a genuine story of love and redemption. "And what about the baby?" Julia asked, nestled in Raphael's arms as they finalized their preparations in bed. "Should we mention the pregnancy?" Raphael caressed her face tenderly. "It's still early, just a few weeks. Perhaps it's best we keep this happiness to ourselves for now." He smiled. "Besides, if we mention it now, it will look like we're using the baby to validate our story." Julia nodded, agreeing with the wisdom of the decision. "I'm scared." "Raphael," she confessed, her voice small in the dimness of the room. "What if this public exposure affects our relationship? What if it's too much for us to bear?" He held her tighter. "We've been through worse apart. Together we can face any storm." The interview, conducted in the mansion's library the following morning, was intense and emotional. The journalist Ferdinand Myers, known for his humane and ethical approach, led the conversation with respect and depth. Raphael and Julia opened their hearts, sharing not just the facts, but the emotions behind them. Raphael spoke openly about the traumatic loss of Helen and their unborn child, about how the pain had turned him into someone obsessed with control, someone who believed he could even buy fatherhood through a contract. "I was broken," he admitted, holding Julia's hand in front of the cameras. "I thought I could fill the void with money and power. The contract I proposed was a reflection of a man who had forgotten how to love, how to trust." Julia, in turn, recounted her struggle to keep her sister alive and the inn afloat after her husband's death, and how the deal with Raphael had initially seemed like her only way out. "I accepted out of desperation, but I discovered I couldn't go through with it without real feelings being involved," she explained, with the simple dignity that always characterized her. "Fortunately, I never had to make that choice. The contract was voided long before our relationship truly began." "And when did that happen?" Ferdinand asked. "When did you realize there was more than an agreement between you?" Raphael and Julia exchanged a look heavy with intimacy before he answered. "For me, it was when I saw her stand up to me without fear on the very first day, defending her dignity even when facing the possibility of losing everything. Julia challenged me to be a better man from the start, even without realizing it." The interview, published the next day as a special feature, caused a national stir. Instead of the scandal their enemies had hoped for, Raphael and Julia won the public's sympathy with their story of redemption and true love, born from the most unlikely circumstances. Social media was flooded with messages of support. The stock value of Montgomery Investments rose, and Vincent's plan to discredit Raphael backfired spectacularly. A week after the interview, Raphael called a board meeting and proposed Vincent's removal for ethical violations and attempted sabotage. "You can't prove it was me," Vincent challenged during the tense meeting. "I don't have to," Raphael replied calmly. "The board has already voted. Your betrayal has cost you not only your position, but the trust of this company. Your shares are blocked from sale for 1 year. after which Montgomery will have the right of first refusal at a pre-fixed price. You're finished here, Vincent. The victory over Vincent, however, was just the beginning of a period of profound transformation in Raphael and Julia's lives. With the threat removed, and their relationship stronger than ever, they could finally focus on the future they wanted to build together. 3 months after the interview, when Julia's pregnancy could no longer be hidden, they announced the happy news to friends and family at a small celebration at the Harbour House Inn, the inn in Seabrook that Julia had renovated with her personal touch, combining its original historic charm with modern luxury facilities. Marianne, now responding extraordinarily well to treatment and gradually regaining her health, was the first to raise a toast to her future niece or nephew. To the luckiest child in the world, she declared, raising her glass of juice, who will be born surrounded by true love, not contractual clauses. The joke, possible only because the initial wound had healed, drew laughter from everyone present, including Raphael, who hugged Marianne with genuine affection. The two families, so different in their origins, were beginning to intertwine into a new tapestry of affection. The wedding was celebrated when Julia was 5 months pregnant, on the beach in Seabrook, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a simple and emotional ceremony with few guests, only the people who truly mattered in their lives. Julia wore a light dress that highlighted her rounded belly, her hair adorned with tropical flowers. Raphael, in a light-colored suit without a tie, had a sparkle in his eyes that no one who had known him in previous years would recognize. "When I proposed that absurd contract, I thought I was just looking for an heir," he said in his vows, moving everyone present. "But the universe, in its infinite wisdom, understood that what I really needed was a partner, a companion, someone to remind me what it means to be truly human. You, Julia Albright, saved not only your world when you accepted my proposal, but mine as well." Julia, with tears in her eyes, responded, "Our story began in the most unlikely way, with a paper contract that tried to frame feelings in clauses. Today we sign a very different contract, not with ink on paper, but with our hearts and souls. Her contract of love, trust, and partnership that no lawyer could draft and no court could annul." During the reception, held in the newly renovated outdoor area of the Harbour House Inn, Raphael surprised Julia with a special gift, the deed to an art restoration studio in the historic center of Seabrook, where she could finally practice the profession she had always dreamed of, balancing it with motherhood and managing the inn. "So that you never have to choose between your passions again," he said, handing her the keys. "Your art, our family, this place you love, you deserve it all." 4 months later, on a particularly starry spring night, Michael Albright Montgomery was born, a healthy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined expression. The birth, at one of New York's best hospitals, was attended not only by Raphael, but also by Marianne and Eliza, forming a circle of love around the new life that had arrived. When he held his son in his arms for the first time, Raphael felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. The boy he had dreamed of creating by contract now gazed at him with curious eyes, born not of a business deal, but of a love that had defied all odds. "He's perfect," he whispered to Julia, who watched the scene with an exhausted but radiant smile. "You're perfect. We're perfect together." In the years that followed, the Albright Montgomery family found their own unique balance. Raphael continued to lead his company, but with a new philosophy that prioritized not only profit, but social impact and the well-being of his employees. Under his leadership, Montgomery Investments became a pioneer in human-centered business practices, including extended paternity leave and support programs for employees with sick family members, policies inspired by his own personal journey. Julia divided her time between motherhood, managing the inn, and her new restoration studio, which soon gained a national reputation for its meticulous work in preserving American historical heritage. The Harbour House Inn, under her renewed management, became not only a commercial success, but a cultural hub that promoted the art and history of Seabrook. Marianne, fully recovered after years of treatment, took over as director of the newly established Helen Montgomery Foundation, dedicated to research on rare autoimmune diseases and support for patients without resources. The initiative, funded by Raphael in memory of his first wife, closed a cycle of pain transformed into purpose. On a particularly sunny afternoon, 5 years after that first tense meeting at Montgomery Investments, Raphael and Julia were on the porch of the Harbour House Inn, watching Michael play in the sand under Marianne's watchful eye. "Do you have any regrets?" Raphael asked, breaking the comfortable silence they shared. "About what?" Julia replied, turning to him with a curious smile. "About signing that absurd contract. About entering my life that way." Julia intertwined her fingers with his, the sun making their wedding rings shine. "How could I regret the path that brought us here?" She smiled, caressing the small belly that was beginning to form again, still invisible under her light dress. "Besides, you technically tore up the contract, remember?" Raphael laughed, pulling her closer. "Best decision of my life." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "Well, the second best. The first was letting you into my office that day, even if it was to challenge me and turn my world upside down." Julia rested her head on his shoulder, contemplating their son building sandcastles with the intense concentration so characteristic of his father. "You know what I sometimes think? That our contract was fulfilled after all. Not the paper one with its clauses and demands, but a much more important one, written in our souls before we even met." "A contract of love," Raphael murmured, quoting her wedding vows. "Exactly. The only one that truly matters." As the sun began to set over the sea off Seabrook, painting the sky with the same colors that had witnessed their wedding years before, Raphael and Julia remained embraced on the porch of the inn they had almost lost, and which now symbolized their shared home. Michael was now running towards them, his dark hair wet with sea spray, his green eyes shining with joy, the living proof that the most beautiful contracts in life are those written not with ink, but with the heart. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Julia and Raphael has touched your hearts. A story that began with a cold contract and ended with the purest love, reminding us that the paths of the heart are unpredictable and wonderful. To continue being moved by equally captivating stories, find our special playlist by clicking the link on your left. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of human feelings. Tell us in the comments, do you believe that true love can be born from the most unlikely circumstances? We eagerly await your reflections.